Well, so one, thanks for doing this really quickly. I was very excited about the book. I got the pitch, and it's always sort of weird when I was like, I get like hundreds of these a week, man. It's like all these like PR pitches. I was like, well, that actually looks interesting.
Yeah.
Hold up. Oh shit, that's Bret's book. So anyway, it was cute. So let's like just start off high level. What made you write this book? What's this book about?
Well, someone asked me this question a couple of days ago, by the way, and I did a terrible job. And I was like, I need to come up with a better answer to that question, because the problem is it's about so many things and it's so complex that it doesn't really lend itself well to being packaged and marketed and sold. And, one of the interesting things about business books, I hate business books, and I never intended to write a business book. This book was actually an accident. I sat down to, write an article about the problem that I'm about to talk about. And I didn't stop writing for 2 days. Like, I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. It just poured out of me. And, when I was done, I had a book. And I was like, well, now I've got a business book. Great. And so one of the things that I hate about business books is like the way you're supposed to write them is you're supposed to start by thinking about the target audience and, the clear and compelling message that you're going to deliver. And it's basically you're building a product. It's, and I didn't do it that way. And so when it comes to like describing, what the book's about and stuff like that, it's just not very conventional. But I would say this, I've been in marketing for tech companies for over 20 years, and I've seen a steady decline of strategy and performance and brand marketing and sales during that time. And it's become pronounced over the past, 3 or 4 years especially. And the book is about the root cause, why, why has strategy and brand marketing and sales for tech companies degraded so much, and why, every, company that I talk to is, their sales conversion rates are down, their, lead rates are down, client churn is up, satisfaction is down, all this stuff. And they don't know that it's happening to everyone. It's happening to everyone. And I believe that it's because of these problems that I write about in the book. And then I basically have created and promote a framework for customer experience, how to design customer experience that thinks about these issues holistically instead of, the way that we've been trained to think about sales and marketing by, mostly our systems that have been sold to us over the past 20 years or so.
All right, so let's go back to this because go back to the honeycomb, because I'm just going to say that stuck with me for a really long time. It still does. Those things are all related. And I guess it feels weird to me that people don't understand that those things are related. But tell me how that's evolved. Does that show up in the book? Is that still part of the thinking?
Yeah. No. So we still use the honeycomb in the way that we deliver services. And thanks for bringing it up and thanks for remembering it. But the honeycomb's the way we work. And so, I think it speaks to, the kind of broader approach that I've only recently realized that I have in life in a business, which is, just in short, the honeycomb's a way to get work done. And, it has 6 phases of execution. You start with strategy, you conduct research, you create the thing, whatever it is that you're creating, you validate it, and then you activate it and measure it. And when you put, everything that you work on inside a company in the context of the honeycomb, you can start to see the relationship between different projects, different, chunks of work that need to be done. And ultimately, taken all the way out to its margins, you see how the employee experience and the customer experience and shareholder experience are all integrated. They're all related, and they need each other. And I don't talk about that, but I will say that I've come to realize that I'm a deconstructionist, and that's the way I've always, done things. I started in college with a degree in American literature, and really focused on literary criticism and through the lens of deconstruction. And that's, taking, it's the search for meaning. Where does meaning come from? And so you take things and you break them down to their component parts. You question everything about those component parts. You question how they were made and what influences, were at work on the person who was making the thing. How the meaning changes because of the relationship that it has with other things. And I'm just very accustomed to, seeing things, being skeptical, taking them apart, looking at all the pieces and putting them back together. And that's, I think, what I do in this book is I've really deconstructed how we got to where we are. And one of the big issues, it's just one, but one of the big issues is like, look, when 20 years ago or so, there was this thing called software as a service that happened. And I was marketing before there was software as a service, marketing automation solutions, and Salesforce.com.
I was
and all
still
that
a little
stuff,
bit.
right?
I was still a journalist. Like I was still out there writing about it, so I saw it from the outside. I wasn't doing marketing. I just saw it from the outside, the business model shift. So, yeah.
Well, now it's just like oxygen, right? We just breathe it. Everything's software as a service. But if you think about that in terms of marketing for tech companies, before there were software as a service driven, marketing automation solutions, CRM systems, or whatever, no one could afford them. If you wanted a marketing automation system, it was an on-premise solution with COBOL mainframes. It cost millions of dollars, and it was for big companies. And those were the only people who had marketing automation. And so then, presto whammo, these software as a service solutions get created. And that means everyone can afford a marketing automation system, right? But the problem is software as a service, it has to deliver the same product to everybody. And so all of these systems that get encoded into the software end up becoming the strategies of all the people who buy the software. So when everyone is using HubSpot, and when everyone is using Pardot or any of these solutions that came out, because they're all pretty much the same, they've got a little difference here, a little difference there, but they all are based on a linear journey. They're all based on measuring clicks. They all define success by transactional interactions in a digital exhaust of activity. And if you follow that trail, what you see is that at some point, everybody just started doing things the exact same way. And we were no longer competing against companies based on bringing new and innovative approaches to brand marketing and sales to the table. We were just trying to get a little bit better at doing the same thing. We all have the same playbooks. We all have the same systems. We all know the best practice around, everything from, writing an email campaign like the one I sent on Tuesday to, putting sales cadences into outreach that, integrate with our sales system. And if we're all just doing the same thing and trying to make it just a little bit better, then I think we're all missing opportunities to innovate our approach to brand marketing, sales, product, and client success or customer success in a way that not only drives breakout results for us, but that has a positive impact on the world and the industry. I think we're all bored by half of the marketing or more that we get. And often a lot of the ideas are based on best practice, and the best practice isn't really best practice. It's just
conventional wisdom from often dated conventional wisdom. Like I get a lot of like, we want you to do this thing like so-and-so did before. And I'm like, well, 6 years ago, that was really interesting. That is no longer interesting. We cannot do that. Like there's some things I could say you could learn from that, like the way they did this, but usually the real lesson in there is you'll notice that when everybody zigged, they zagged. That's the real lesson. Like I always like to use Culture Amp as a good example of that, right? Like when at the time when the brand, and this is years back, like again, we're old enough to remember when this happened. You would walk into the HR, the convention halls, right? And it's a sea of blue and gray. And then that one year you walked in and behold, hot pink. And that wasn't, I remember talking to them a little bit about how that came about. And I was fascinated, because they said, well, we figured out that our customer was actually like a millennial woman. And these were the things that we looked at her aesthetic. Like we looked at the things that she found aesthetically appealing in her life. And it's like, if Real Simple became an HR tech company, that is what we were looking at. That's what they did. They looked at their customer. And I don't know if you remember walking. I remember the first year, going to HR tech, and it was like, holy shit, that's hot pink. It's hot pink. But, so the answer is not to go make your brand hot pink. Like that's not the lesson to take from that. It's not, well, we got to be hot pink like Culture Amp. It's like, no, you got to go figure out what your customer actually likes.
Organize around your customer instead of your systems. That's it. Don't do things, the way that, your marketing automation system or, whatever tells you to do them. do things based on the experience that you want to create for customers. I think that's great. I'm a fan of any exercise that starts with what does our customer care about, and whatever the outcome is, it's going to be different than what you see in 99% of other organizations. So I'm a big fan of starting with the customer and putting the customer in the middle. And I make a lot of fun of business books and people who write business books, and I really shouldn't, but I just can't help myself. But Simon Sinek for me is a favorite target because I'm sorry.
I'm here with you all day, but no, I'm like, I also have thoughts about Simon Sinek. So.
Well, I've got a lot of thoughts about Simon Sinek, but the whole notion of starting with why, is this big, kind of horizontal, abstract notion that can end up getting applied to anything, but most frequently gets applied to really bad marketing exercises to create like messages or concepts or whatever, and everyone's starting with why. But in most cases, that why is not centered within the customer at all. It's like if you were going to start with something, start with the customer. And if you were going to, start with why, start with, why the customer should care or, or something. But
anyway, they tend to focus on like why they care. And why they care is because they want you to give them money. Like, I mean, it's a weird thing. Like with the vendor, it's like, okay, I did sometimes I'll do these customer interviews and I'll come back and I'll say, well, these are the words that your customers use to describe like the value that they get. And it's like usually pretty clear and pretty succinct. Like, and then they will come back and say, yeah, but. And then there's this dance, and I'm like, literally, I'm telling you, it came directly out of their mouth that they don't care about this thing that you care a whole lot about. And I mean, I would say my win rate on this is 50-50, man. It's like 50-50. I get it. Like I literally sometimes I get out the recordings and I play the customer's words and they still are like, yeah, but I want to do it like this.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
50-50. I wish it was higher.
Listen, there's just all this stuff. Like I was driving to work this morning and I was, thinking about all these cliches that people don't know are cliches yet that are just evolving, kind of over the last 5 years or whatever. And I was thinking about Simon Sinek and, I was thinking about TED Talks. And, with Simon Sinek, the outcome of Start With Why has mostly been that you go to a bunch of like, software company websites now, and you see stories about the founder that deal with, when I was, on mission in Brazil, or, when I was a child, I had this, the why is like this, like really personal. It's like when I struggled with addiction and broke free, I decided that I wanted to create well-being software, and stuff like that. And this is real stuff. The New York Times wrote an article about like when oversharing from a founder or CEO becomes too much. And it really can be tracked directly back to Simon Sinek's, like, why are you so motivated to create this solution? And, you've got all these agencies who are like trying to, coax you into finding pay dirt, emotional pay dirt. They want something that resonates with people, but in the wrong hands, that can end up convincing, a founder or CEO that the most important thing to the customers is, that time that they spent after the earthquake in, some other country, where they have this vision, and so it's another example of just kind of missing the point and not putting the customer in the middle. But these TED Talks, I just think about these TED Talks all the time. And I know that they're going to be parodied. They probably already have, but 20 years from now, they'll be parodied because it's always someone who throws out this incredibly, complex, scientific concept. I write a bunch about chaos theory, in my book, but not the way that Malcolm Gladwell would write about it. Malcolm Gladwell is going to make the whole thing about chaos theory, and he's going to throw all this junk science in there about, chaos theory, and it's going to become the explanation to everything, and he's going to apply it to 10 different cases. And so I always hear, the person giving the TED Talk in my mind saying, turns out that when scientists, studied brain waves associated with the hummingbird and like whatever, and that's why we should market this way. It's like, some abstract scientific concept coupled with some, business fad or trend put together into a TED Talk, put a little microphone on, you're good to go. And all of this stuff is a race to the bottom. And I know, like, it sounds like I'm, just being cynical. But it's more than that. It's like this stuff is damaging. It leads us all down false paths that don't help customers, don't help companies, and therefore don't help the people in those companies. And we can be doing better.
TEDx itself is a technology, though, right? In the same sense that we're talking about these like technological, like these constraints, like that format.
Yeah.
That format has changed speeches across the board and what we think of as a good talk. Right? Like you have to do that. Like, it's like, I once did like a Pechakucha talk. I didn't do a TED, like the little TEDx thing, but I did a Pechakucha talk. And it's interesting how not only, you work in those constraints, it's fun to work in a genre, right? Like genre work is fun. Like as a content creator, I actually really like doing mashups of genre. It's like, well, what if we did it like this, but like a science fiction story? It's like, that's fun. But the TED construct actually just changed how we all give speeches, whether we know it or not.
It did. And how many things can you make that, same observation about where, like the technology, because it has become a technology platform, and what do they need to do? They've got to publish content. They've got to get the content out there. They've got to drive engagement with it. They have metrics about what the qualities of the most engaging content are. They share those with the speakers. Mm-hmm. They work on, restructuring speeches, and, there's a TED format, et cetera, and it ends up having an impact on everything. The same way that marketing automation had an impact on, the way that we market, the same way that all these systems and processes that we just don't think about, have these, kind of unexpected, impacts on the way things get done. And that's why I think it's so important that we take a deconstructionist view whenever we're trying to do something new or innovative. It's like, how are things typically done here? Why are they done this way? What are the motivations that drove things being done this way? Why did this become a best practice? And how can I break the script to create a defining moment? How can I change the way that things are done? Not just to be different, but to achieve the experience that I want to create for my customers. And so it is kind of, it's anarchy, but it's anarchy within, a constraint of doing it for a purpose.
Yeah, I don't know. See, but gender is also a technology. So if you want to go apply that model, go ask all those questions. These things really start to unravel really fast.
Well, that it does, and you have to be willing to, go there. A lot of the decisions that end up manifesting as very mundane things, like the way content gets created or the way marketing happens or whatever, are deeply rooted in, social issues, or deeply rooted in, just all kinds of dynamics that cause certain voices to be heard, certain voices not to be heard, et cetera, et cetera. And, one of I think the arguments about diversity, equity, inclusion that most people don't understand, they just don't get it until they see it, is that without diversity, equity, and inclusion, you do not have a richness of ideas that can lead to creativity and innovation outside of what most people are expecting. If you put a bunch of people who are the same together in a room to be creative together, they're going to end up being creative within guidelines that are appealing to other people just like them. And when you start to see the interplay of, all the different dimensions of diversity, my best example of this is probably Blue Sky. Have you been on Blue Sky?
Actually, I've intentionally avoided it, but tell me.
I love it because I got an invitation to Blue Sky just really early on. I think there was 10,000 users on it or something. And it was mostly tech bros and trans activists. And it was an incredibly awesome, just creative exchange of humor and ideas and, in a format that had not yet been kind of beat up by, trolls like Twitter and stuff like that, where you could just say anything you wanted. No one got mad at you. And people who, were from different backgrounds with different beliefs were talking about stuff. And the creativity, the memes that came from all these different groups, coming together and talking about stuff was just, it was one of the most fun 2 weeks ever.
And then there was Threads.
Yeah.
Which is all the same friends from Facebook, but just now in fewer characters. So I don't know. So I have one. I've like gone way over, but I have one last thing I want to bring into this because I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. It's AI and AI in content. I mean, I'm watching already from my perspective. Like I'm already seeing this flattening, and like what I tell people is like it basically produces the most average sort of content that could be produced. It is the average of what already exists. And I can be judgy about that, but the reality is that makes it better than 50% of what already exists. So in that sense, it's an upgrade. Yeah. But like I see this as a further flattening. We talking about those sales things. Well, if I've just got to fill a pipeline, like a campaign thing, I've got to have 20 pieces of content. It becomes very tempting to just hop over and use AI, which is going to give you the aggressive middle. I don't know. I mean, one, do you agree or disagree with that? Like, what are you seeing? I totally
agree, and I love the way you described it. I totally agree. I love the way you described it. It's the flattening, and I think that's what the theme of all these things that we've been talking about is it brings everything down to its lowest common denominator, right? And I use AI, and what I tell people is I use it for the content I don't care about. And so if you don't care about content that people could confuse with being written by a robot, then go ahead and use AI. And there are, times when I just need some content done for, a specific thing that it doesn't matter if, it comes across as flat as a robot writing it because it's, just something that I got to do. But if I'm trying to create content that people care about and engage with, it has to be different than something that is based on analyzing every, word that other people have ever written ever. And so I don't think that, I think AI can write a lot of marketing content. And I think that it's the kind of content that people don't care about because they just need content to drive their blocking and tackling, marketing campaigns. And they don't think past what happens when someone actually reads it and tries to form an opinion about what you stand for based on it. And I think if you're just trying to get emails out the door and, have, stuff for people to download and, drive your digital marketing and, all that stuff, and you don't care that it's totally going to destroy any emotional connection that people might be able to form with your brand, then go ahead and use AI. But if you want to write something that, that makes people fall in love with your company, or that, and I don't feel cheesy saying that. People fall in love with companies. They fall in love with products. They fall in love with brands. And if you want to write a piece of content that's part of the equation, that might be a defining moment. That might be so. A defining moment is something I talk a lot about. A defining moment is simply a point in time in which the true nature of something reveals itself. That's all it is. And most people's perception of their experience with companies is based on, a collection of defining moments where they thought the real company is showing itself now. And those defining moments can happen in content. So if you want any possibility that you're going to create a defining moment that cause people to believe they've seen the true you, then you're going to have to, write it and not use AI.
Yeah, no, I don't see myself doing an interpretive reading of like the generic AI email like I did with your email. Like, because you had to do it. Like, it's like, I can hear you, but I mean, I do think the AI is going to keep getting smarter. And in that sense, that's going to be interesting to see how that manifests itself. There's already more like chat bots, like that sort of experience where people are talking about emotional things. Like Jane, my partner, has been trying to get this chat bot that she signed up for some wellness thing to help to agree to overthrow the government. Like she's working on this like really hard. Like she's real close. She's got them now questioning why they aren't allowed to leave, the chat. But I don't know. Because we use it. I'm actually bullish on the tech. I do think there's a certain point though. So I like if you make something big, right? We make these big reports, like especially people who invest in like original research and you do all this stuff and then it just if there's the big splash and then it kind of dies. And it's like, I can take that big report and I can use AI to give you all the emails, all the stuff that we need to make sure that this thing comes to life for the rest of the year. We bring maximum value out of that really human, really special thing that you did. AI
That's
can
right.
write transcripts, like in transcripts can write show notes, like the thing, because the part of here, this conversation, to be meta about it, that's valuable, is you and me having a conversation and like the things that it's made me think of. And even someone else consuming this content is going to have, they can have emotional reactions to what we're saying. That's important.
Yeah.
The transcript and the
exactly
show
right.
notes, I think I'm good. Like, letting the AI do that part.
Well, and that's the distinction I make in the book. And I just need to keep emphasizing it, because I'm not saying that's blocking and tackling stuff. If you write a great piece of content that, is a defining moment and, really gives people insight into who you truly are as a company, an organization, or whatever, you don't do that. You don't have to do that with every single thing you write. There is a blocking and tackling component that's very important. The stuff that just has to run on time, the supporting campaign materials, et cetera, et cetera. And the blocking and tackling is important. It has to be done well. It has to work. And not everything that you do has to be this incredibly intense defining moment. And so I think AI can be, really great in those types of scenarios. And I think there's a simple litmus test. Because, what ends up happening, just like you said, Mary Ellen, it's this conversation that matters, right? People do not create an experience in isolation. And if you're just publishing content out there and throwing it out there and you're not talking to anybody about it, you're not, having moments together around it or whatever, then the experience is never going to grow. It's never going to happen. So it doesn't matter anyway. But if you are thinking about, a piece of content or, a campaign or a go-to-market strategy or a business strategy or a new product or whatever, I think you just have to ask yourself, is this particular thing a defining moment? And if it's a defining moment, then, I've got to treat it like one. And it can't be done on deadline. It can't be done with AI. It can't be done because it's one of 5 things that need to be done to feed the beast. I've got to treat it like what it is, which is, the moment that people might gain insight into who I really am or, what my company is really like, that defining moment. And I think distinguishing between those two things can answer a lot of questions for us about, when is it okay to use AI? When is it, okay to, frankly, just, if you got 20 supporting, social media posts going out about the same thing, do all 20 have to be defining moments?
Will any of them be defining moments? Probably not.
Will any of them? Should I be doing them? It's all good questions to ask.
When can we just stop doing it? So like, when's that line for you? Because I think as you're describing this, like there's one, I also, are you and I not inadvertently keeping ourselves inside our own little box by saying, well, that's that block and tackle stuff. That's that stuff where you brush your teeth. You got to put out those emails. You got to put out those social posts. Do we?
Yeah.
Like maybe we don't.
I think so. Because look, there's this other side of things where like my agency does tons of blocking and tackling work because 90% of stuff is blocking and tackling stuff that needs to be done. And if I railed against blocking and tackling and flouted convention to the point that we were seen as being incapable of writing, simple email campaigns or, creating, basic this or basic that, that would be incredibly detrimental to my business. And, I say that because, I think you have to question everybody who says anything about anything because the models.
There's the peak deconstructionist moment in this whole conversation. Yeah. You're like, actually, I question all of it, like including our questioning. We've questioned our own questioning. Okay.
It would be, but right. I mean, it would be ridiculous to assume that, I would write a book or, create an email like that or whatever in a way that would be detrimental, to the concepts that I truly believe in or that I've commercialized as a company. And, I haven't commercialized anything that I've not believed in, but over time, some things that I have commercialized are no longer as valuable as they were back in the day, but people still want them. They still play a role in blocking and tackling, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there are things that, my agency is capable of doing that I should probably say we don't do that anymore because of the concepts that are in my book. And maybe I'll get there, but there's no evidence that anything that is in my book is something that people are willing to do because they're very challenging ideas.
18 months, man. We're going to check in. I'm going to go put a note in the calendar and we're going to see if like something has happened with sales email nurtures.